Then they were interested in the question of, does glyphosate accumulate in the tissues? A very important question, because they argue that it just passes through, very quickly pees out through the urine. It's all gone. It's wonderful that way, only lasts a couple of weeks. Not true, because they found radiolabel in the tissues. When they looked, they found it in different tissue samples from these bluegill sunfish. And then they said, well, let's just detect, see how much glyphosate is in those same tissues. So they did the standard test for glyphosate, not knowing about the radiolabel, just looking for it. Is that radiolabel still glyphosate, or is it something else, right? And they only had 20%. So 80% of the radiolabel went missing in terms of glyphosate, something else. Then they said, oh, well, what happens if we break down the proteins into individual amino acids? Maybe that will increase our yield. And why they got that idea, I don't know, but that's the same idea I would have gotten, because I'm looking to see if glyphosate incorporated into the amino acids in mistake of glycine. So glyphosate is a glycine molecule. Glycine is an amino acid. It's one of the coding amino acids. It goes into the proteins. Everywhere glycine goes, glyphosate could go instead, because it matches the code. And that's the really diabolical thing that glyphosate does. It gets into the proteins by mistake in place of glycine. And so when they did that, they added the enzymes to break it down. They got 80% yield. So they got a whole much more of the glyphosate was detected in those samples once they broke down the proteins. And they said perhaps it was incorporated into the protein. That's their words. And then, of course, this was buried. They didn't publish it. Anthony Samsel got it from the government through a FOIA request, and they made him sign something that said he wouldn't show it to anybody. He had to keep it to himself, but he could write about it. So we wrote about it in one of the papers we published.
So, oh my gosh! So your understanding, to break it down, tell me if I'm doing this correct, is glyphosate has the same code as glycine. And so it basically displaces glycine and inserts itself in that chain of amino acid.
Exactly. It puts itself into the protein where glycine should go.
Right. And so now talk about what happens when glycine is deficient and glyphosate is in its place.
Yeah, well, especially if you don't get enough glycine in your diet, you're going to have a bigger problem with glyphosate. In fact, one of the things that practitioners are finding is that they can give glycine supplements, for example, to autistic kids, to help them keep the glyphosate out of the proteins, just by virtue of having more glycine around, outcompeting the glyphosate, and therefore decreasing the likelihood that glyphosate gets into the proteins.